If you've been enjoying R4E, the Reason for Everything podcast, please be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all platforms or wherever you get your podcasts.
So my name is Leyla. I run a kind of podcast and courses and whole platform with the name of Learn Persian with Chai and Conversation. I started it in 2010, actually, December of 2010. We're now in 2024, so it's been a really long time. I studied architecture, but I've always had kind of an entrepreneurial background. That's what I've been interested in. I've never been interested in doing a 9 to 5. Many apologies to 9 to 5ers. So from the beginning, I read 4 Hour Work Week, blew my mind in 2008 when all the architects were being laid off from their jobs anyway. So I already had that idea myself in my mind of just not wanting to work traditional hours or a traditional job. And then once the layoffs happened, I realized that, a 9 to 5 is not a guarantee of anything. Basically architecture was kind of the canary in the coal mine with the financial crisis in 2008. And within a few months, no one was building houses anymore. Obviously, it was a huge housing bubble bust and all the mortgages and, you remember, hopefully. And so I realized I couldn't really count on that. And I had always had side hustles. So I used to make buttons and sell them around town, like 1-inch buttons. And I would do a ton of different things. And the podcast, when podcasts came out, I really loved podcasts and I listened to them all the time. And there was no podcast for teaching the Persian language. And so in 2010, I was like, this is something I could do. My mom taught Persian growing up. So I started this podcast, and actually what I would do is it was a free podcast, free, lessons. And I would say on the podcast, if you want a PDF guide to this free lesson, just send me $1 through PayPal and I'll email you the PDF guide. So very low tech. And the first podcast that I put out, I got my first $1. And then each podcast I would put out, I'd get an extra $1. I had 2 lessons, I'd get $2, 3 lessons, $3. So that was a big motivator. And I saw that there really was a need for that. So I just started churning out these lessons and, very low tech from the beginning. In 2014, I finally got a tech partner, a business partner who was 50-50. I always wanted a partner. The podcast itself is me teaching someone how to speak the Persian language, but he was just kind of an actor in the whole thing. But I wanted a partner to really be there with me and test out ideas with and work on this together. And so I found a partner, a friend who was a tech guy. And he was like, I can help you with all this tech stuff, but I'd have to be a partner in the business, not just an employee. So he became a 50-50 partner. And, from there, it really took off. We could bounce ideas off each other. And he had the technical, wherewithal to actually make those ideas work. So then it was no longer like this, send me $1 and I'll send you a PDF. It became automated. And then, and that was super helpful to have someone with a technical background like that. The entire website right now things have grown so much and it's very technical and it's all built from scratch. It was before Teachable and all that kind of stuff that we started this all. So about in 2017, we switched to a subscription model rather than a pay and then give everything because, we kept continually improving everything all the time, adding more resources. And when people had paid us that $1, they still got everything that we produced. So subscription made more sense. And then, of course, 2020, the pandemic hit. And that's when, everybody was kind of learning Persian more. And then really the protests that happened in 2022, there was a huge, so in 2022, there was this women life freedom movement that happened. And there was this renewed sense of Iranians really wanting to get back to their roots. And, there was this huge surge of people wanting to learn Persian. So that's kind of been another wave of, of what we're doing. So that's kind of the short of it. And I will say, I went from working when the 2008 financial crisis happened, I never worked full time in architecture again. I worked about half time in architecture and then half time in side hustles. in about 2016, the income from the podcast exceeded my architecture income, and then I never went back again, and I just stopped that work.
So cool. Thanks
Yeah,
for
that's
the
kind of a
backdrop
short
there.
intro. Yeah.
Yeah, no, super helpful. And I've a bunch of different branches I want to go off of there, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. Let's start with, in the spirit of one of your podcast, maybe episode series, we'll call it, growing up Irani. What was it like for you growing up? So you said your mom taught Persian. Is your dad Iranian as well? Give me the backdrop for growing up Irani, assuming in the States.
Yeah, so I moved to Texas with my mom at the age of 3.5. My father, they had split up already in Iran, but he moved to London and then
Okay.
he remarried there and had children there. And so we were just a total separate family. My mom moved in with her parents. So I grew up in a house with my grandparents. And I, my mom really did a good job of instilling culture in me. And I just was always so proud of being Iranian. And I was so excited to speak Persian. And, I learned English in kindergarten, but I always maintained like I am Iranian and this is, who I am and that's my language and everybody speak Farsi with me. So people would call and try to speak English to me and I'd be like, excuse me, I know Farsi. You speak Farsi with me. So I don't know. I always had this strange fascination, obsession with Iran. And so even
What
like when I was in college, I would kind of invite people over for cooking Iranian food and telling them about poetry. And it was just something I loved to do.
Why do you think that is? Do you think it was living with your grandparents? So it was like kind of doubled down into the culture as opposed to just being with, a parent? Or is there a point that you can think of? Was maybe your first time hearing about Haji Firuz? Was there a first time that you were like, okay, I'm diving into this? Or by the time you were probably fully sentient in kindergarten learning English, were you already fully bought in? Give me a little bit more into what that was like for you.
I'm not sure. One thing I will say, I visited Iran for the first time after we'd moved when I was 9,
Okay.
and we lived in this town called Ekbatan, and we went into this house in Ekbatan, and the architecture there was actually in the international style, where on the ground floor there were shops, and then there were parks that kids could play in, and then all these like very dense apartments. So going from the suburbs of Dallas, Texas, where I grew up, there that was like a heaven for children. There was like no cars, there was like ample places for kids to just run wild and be free. So I loved that about it. I loved the culture of Iran of like, neighbors watching out for kids and kids being able to like go wherever they wanted. So that was a big part of it. But also growing up in Texas, as strange as it sounds, like I feel like Texans have this big appetite for diversity. And again, it sounds strange. You have a grandmother in Austin, so maybe you know a little bit more, but I feel like it's like cool to be different here. And like,
Yeah.
I would tell my friends in elementary school about Iran and they just thought it was so cool and like, tell us more. And Iranian culture somehow is very similar to like Texan culture. Like they're like music and taruf, like Southern hospitality and stuff.
Mm.
So I feel like there was just this, I would tell all my friends and they were so interested in Iranian culture.
It's so fascinating. The one thing I feel like the Iranians and the Texans don't really believe in at all or subscribe to is any piece of ambivalence. It's strong opinions on one side or the other. And so
Yeah.
I'm sure someone someday at the University of Texas or some school in Iran is going to write a thesis paper about the similarities between the two. Because to your point, I mean, the two you listed off between Tarov and the music is a great starting point in and of itself.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, very strong cultures. Like you picture a Texan, you know exactly what that is. You picture an Iranian, and there's a lot of stereotypes too, a lot of like negative stereotypes from both places. And like, oh, Texas is a desert and everyone rides horses, and then Iran's a desert and everyone rides camels. There's just so many similarities.
It's so funny. Now, you mentioned when you were 9, when you went over there, you saw, you mentioned the architecture. Was that a point into your interest in the architecture space? I know that was your kind of starting profession.
Not
before
at all.
Here, but, okay.
Architecture was only because my mom, in Iran, it's really hard to get into architecture school. I wanted to study English literature, and then she was like, you should study something that opens doors for you, like get a professional degree. So sure, get literature, but also do architecture. And that will like open up the most doors. And honestly, like I would not be able to do what I do today without that education. Like architecture really exposes you to a high level of learning how to think. And I feel like it's a great architecture, or it's a great education for entrepreneurs.
It's interesting. I mean, in a lot of the technology jobs today, even though some of the finance roles, it's like solutions architects and technological architects. And even what you're doing today, like running a business, I mean, any of these executives at any of these big businesses or small businesses are really architects. I always call them creators. But whether you're running a company like Apple or
Mm-hmm.
you're running a company like Learn Persian with Chai and Conversation, you're really overseeing a lot of different operations, and you have your CEO hat on, your CMO hat on, your like all of the different roles that you're doing that you're really having to manage a lot. To your
Totally.
point, probably very similar to what you were doing. I mean, similar in some ways to what you're doing in the architecture space.
Absolutely. I think that's totally true.
Now, you mentioned when you were in school or in undergrad, you were hosting your friends and sharing about the Iranian culture, making food. What was it? Did you have your crock pot making your baghali polo, or what was it like for you being an undergrad? I feel like when I was in school, there was a strong stereotype for the factions of whether it was the Indians or the other Middle Eastern culture groups or the Asian culture groups that all got together and had their events. Was there a large cohort of Iranians or Persians at your undergrad that you were going to, or what was that like for you?
Yeah, there really were. I always, growing up in Dallas, actually, even though I felt very Iranian myself, I didn't connect with other Iranians around. I always thought there was like this stereotype of Iranians in America that I did not fit into, like wearing a lot of makeup or knowing how to dance or all that kind of stuff. I just didn't have that. And so I always felt kind of out of place with Iranians in like my high school. My high school had a lot of Iranians in it, actually, but I was never in that group. But then when I came to the University of Texas, we had a organization for Iranians. And then, I met these Iranians that were just very weird. And I was like, oh, it's not that I don't relate with Iranians. Like I relate with weird people. I had friends that are, like lifelong friends that I met in college that were, part of the Iranian Students Organization at UT that were just very, out there, like musicians and artists. And I still am very much in touch with them.
Too cool. Now, you graduate from undergrad. Did you go right into the architecture space before the great financial crisis, or what was, from thinking of the current role you're running or current position you're building now to, let me rephrase that, from graduating undergrad to where you are today? Did you only go into architecture? Did you have any, you mentioned some other side hustles? What else was kind of going on in the background?
Yeah, so in 2006, I graduated from architecture school. It was a 5-year program. And then I went straight into architecture and I got a great job. And, when you're not used to like making money, I started there and I was really into like frugality and investing and all that stuff. So I right off the bat started investing and like saving money and doing all that kind of stuff. And I was just remember like at the time I was just like, man, this is so much money. I could just throw it into investments and I had cheap rent and everything. But then even at the same time, like I said, I had this like button business and I would trade buttons for like services in town. Like we have a really good juice place here, but expensive juices. And I was like, I'm not going to spend $9 on a juice, but I will trade buttons for a juice. So I would do that. So I always had these side hustles. And then actually, I quit my job right before the financial crisis. I actually wasn't laid off then. I was so I quit in order to create a Persian language board game, which my family had kind of thought of. So that was my first like foray into entrepreneurship. So I quit to do that. And at my architecture job, they were like, okay, go work on that for a bit and then come back. But then I quit in like or what was it, September or October of 2007. And then they were like, come back. And then by like December, January, everyone had been laid off from the office. So there was no way to go back. And then I ended up having to get a job to come back to Austin to work, getting a job at like 2/3 my former salary. And just in order to come back and like have some job. So I did that. But again, I always had those side hustles where I could
Yeah.
save money still and have other possibilities.
The story of leaving just a couple of months before everyone got laid off is, I feel like, a typical case study in a lot of the folks that I have on the other side of the camera or on the other side of the microphone from me, where it's these weird almost steps away from perfect timing
Right.
that end up kind of getting them to where they need to be. But it's almost that quick perspective check that in your head, you're probably thinking in January of 2008 at that point, like, holy cow, like if I would have waited 4 months. And I feel like it's almost like not near death is a dramatic term. I'm saying this in air quotes for anyone just listening on audio, but those close calls, if you will, that get people to start thinking through things a little bit differently. And I'm curious, was that the case for you? I mean, thinking through, hey, if I would have stuck around a little bit further, I would kind of be SOL.
Well, kind of. I mean, I was anyway. I mean, I only had a few months savings, so I had to get another job. So it wasn't, yeah, the timing was funny. Like, I guess I left on my own terms, but then I kind of had to come back in a more desperate position. You know, a lot of people that got laid off got, unemployment and all that stuff, and I didn't get that. So I had to come back with like a job that I didn't necessarily want.
Tell me about the Persian board game. It sounds like that entrepreneurial. Now, to your point, that was your first kind of full venture there. Tell me more about that. What was the inception of that? Like, how did you?
Well,
yeah,
it's not great. I would say. So basically, the family was working on this board game, and I was like, okay, well, I have a design background. I'll work on this thing and I'll design it. So I went back to Dallas after I had quit the job or taken, a leave from the job. And one thing I discovered when I was working on the board game is that the amount of work I produced while I was just home, just focused on this thing, was a lot less than when I had a job and I had a lot less time. Like, I needed that stimulation and that work and that, I needed to keep going, especially when you're that young. I was probably like 24, 25 at the time. You need to be like working really hard all the time and working on like side hustles and like hanging out with friends and like whatever. You need that stimulation. Like, you need to like go hard, I think. And I kind of put the brakes on all that, and I was just focused on this one thing. So that wasn't great. The other thing that wasn't great is that we kind of rushed it and we didn't do all the research that we should have. And it was before, the internet and before courses and before you could really do like a Kickstarter. It was before Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And so we didn't know if there was like an appetite for the game. We had to order in a giant batch from China. So we spent, $20,000 on this game and we sold like 10 of them or something. Nobody wanted a Persian language board game. And we just didn't have the way to like test it. Versus like the podcast, it was a good lesson. It was like, okay, don't make something that you don't know there's a need for it. Whereas the podcast, like I said from the beginning, I was like, it was very low stakes. It was like, send me $1. And then once I got the $1, I was like, okay, if someone's sending me $1, then there's an appetite for this.
Yeah. The that point on product market fit is so important. And I feel like, to your point, creators, entrepreneurs, investors, now it's so much easier to see if there's even an addressable market for stuff, because whether it's Kickstarter, Patreon, whatever it is, there's so many ways to even see if there's a desire to build, or even just posting a poll. I saw you posted your poll on Instagram today about the upcoming boot camp. It's so much easier to, crowdsource ideas, crowdsource sentiment today than it was, like, rather than having to pull in a, what do they call it, focus group. And that just doesn't even, probably barely exists now.
Yeah, exactly. And we were advertising that thing on Persian language TV, and it was so expensive to get ads on that TV station. And then like we had to have a phone number. It was just so hard back then. It's so much easier now.
So you go back, and then in 2010, you pick up the microphone and you start the podcast. You mentioned, there was and that's early days of podcasting still at this point, where you're really kind of digging into that. Why did you go the podcast? I know you mentioned, easier to just lower stakes, lower cost of entry, but why not? Well, I mean, what was the thought process like for going podcast as opposed to any other vehicle or medium?
Well, because I listened to a lot of podcasts, and I did not understand that nobody else listened to podcasts, or like still it's such a small market, until in 2015, my business partner and I went to a like podcast conference, and the theme of the podcast conference in 2015 was, this is such a new medium and no one even knows like what podcasts are. So we're at the very beginning, only like 0.2% of humans listen to podcasts, and it's going to grow from here. And then that was what was a wake up call for me. I was like, what? People don't listen to podcasts? Oh gosh. Okay. We got to get out of this. Like, we got to do other things. So for me, it was just like, I do what I'm interested in and like what I follow. So I loved podcasts. There were like great language podcasts then. So it wasn't really about the media. I don't know. It was just what I was interested in.
You're following your heart.
Yes. And even now, I feel like everything, I do listen to a lot of entrepreneurship podcasts. I read all the reports, but really, I only do what I'm interested in. Like, I'm not like following trends or anything like that. I'm just doing, I think my biggest advice, or what I think that has led to the success, is I've just been doing consistent work on something that I really love for a long time. And
Yeah.
that's really the only formula. So it doesn't matter if it's a podcast or if it's like social media post or a newsletter. I've just been doing all of those things just slowly for a long, long time.
Consistency is so key. And even it's so funny in your intro, when you're talking about your background and experience, you mentioned, started in 2010 and then in 2014, you had this big breakthrough, and it's so easy to discount or overlook. 4 years is a long time to really be grinding out before there's even any sort of was it 2015 you started the subscription? Is that right? 2014?
2017 was subscription. Yeah.
And so like, that's a long time. And so it's not easy. It's so gritty. And
it
like,
is.
Whether it's buttons or a board game, whatever it is, I think that there's a certain intangible in the people I speak with that's like, I think that if you would have kept digging in and building out the board game further, you would have figured out make it work if you really cared about it, to your point. If you were passionate and you were consistent about it, there's a way to make it work. I just talked to a guest in the last episode about the people that are following trends, that are trying to get quick fame, that want the 1 million followers tomorrow. Sure, that's great for a year, but what's it going to look like in 10 years? Are you still going to be passionate and love what you're doing? I think that's what you're doing. And the crazy thing, I remember a couple of years ago when I was listening back to one of your OG podcast episodes, I'm like, this was recorded in 2011 and it's still delivering value today. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Right. And yeah, if you look at the chart, I mean, there's all these charts where they're like, okay, this is the business and this is where most people quit. But then if you just keep going, it's like this, and that's totally what this business has been like. It's like 2010 is over here, and then it's like 2017 and then 2020, it's been a huge like meteoric rise, but I had to go through all of this in order to get to that.
It's not always pretty.
Sure. No.
And it's interesting, like the big point that I feel like focused on lately is the idea of overnight successes. And I've had a couple of guests on that, they said, hey, I posted this reel on Instagram. It got 5 million views and I blew up to 300,000 followers overnight. Now I have this whole big platform. Fantastic. That's great. And it's just a matter of, hey, you hit that. Your passion was, for whatever reason, gravitate towards, and now it's your job to be consistent and capture that. But that's very few and far between. That's a needle in a haystack compared to the people that say, hey, I'm going to just be consistent and grind it through. And if I'm delivering value consistently over a long period of time, there's no way they won't be successful. And the beauty of this air quote success is that success to you doesn't necessarily mean sitting on an island with your feet up with your family. It could be being able to do this every day and share more about the Persian language and culture and poetry and everything else on a daily basis until the day you decide to hang up your headphones and microphone,
Yeah. But that 300,000 followers too, like I would say, if you don't have that consistent work for years of like this body of substantial work, like 300,000 followers is great, but you need to have the, substantial work to back it up. So I'd say it's more important to just like do the slow, good work for a long, long time, even if you're not getting those followers. It's just very important, because the followers without that base is kind of empty.
Such a good point.
Doesn't necessarily get you to where you want to go.
It's such a good point, because then you might have 300,000 followers overnight, and that call to action just isn't there because they don't have 10 years of podcast footage to go back and look onto. They don't have PDFs to go and download once you get the subscription teed up, or boot camps to go and sign up for. And so that's few and far between. But I love the idea of what overnight success looks like, where it's the picture of the tip of the iceberg showing, and in reality, it's just years and years of hard work. Like for someone like your shoes, someone reposted tomorrow, you hit 1 million followers. It's, oh my gosh, this overnight success. Leyla Shams was able to do this, out of the other. And in reality, you've been grinding away at this for 15 years.
Yeah. I really realized this. Like I interviewed Ariane Moayed from Succession.
Yeah.
And that really like hit me during that interview. I was like, wow, he worked for like 20 years, just like slow work slow, good work on this theater and like not getting a lot of recognition. And then all of a sudden, like this past couple years, he seemed like he's everywhere, But it is that he's just had this substantial body of work behind him, and now, he can reap the benefits of that on this like global stage. So I think
It's
there's
so
a lot of
beautiful.
people like that to see and to emulate.
Absolutely. Now, tell me about where you are today. I mean, there's a lot of growth and excitement and change that you've gone through in your business over the last decade plus. Where do you see the next, 6, 7, 10 years going for Persian with Chai in Conversation? Are you planning to continue podcasting? Do you want to build more long form? What is exciting you today to continue to build that base of content and excitement?
Yeah, so I started this interview series called Growing Up Irani that you mentioned before. And it was both Growing Up Irani and Growing Up Nimruni, which is half Iranian, and Raising Nimruni. So there's all these like iterations of this interview podcast that I have. And at this point, I've interviewed a lot of people that I've admired for a long time, like Ariane Moayed that I just mentioned. So podcasting is so cool because it really gives you access to anyone that you want. And so at this point, people are sending me books that have been written, and they're like, can you interview the author? And I'm kind of like, oof, okay, it's a lot of work. I feel like that part of my work is the most rewarding, but also the most work for the least amount of like, views and all that kind of stuff. All those metrics are very low on those, but I do feel like that is the important good work. So I love to continue that. I spent last summer in New York, and I got to, meet a lot of these contacts that I had made. And it's really nice to feel like I'm part of this community of like creators of Iranians that are doing wonderful work. So that's really exciting. I'm continuing the courses that we've built and trying to really make, over the years, I just kept thinking, I'll keep doing this until some huge platform comes and like blows me out of the water, like a Rosetta Stone or like a Pimsleur or whatever. I'm sure
Right.
they'll, have all these resources and they'll just, but then as the years have gone on, I keep like looking over my shoulder and I'm like, okay, no one's coming. Is it just me? Am I just going to have to do this? Okay, here I go. I keep going. Now I've added a poetry program. I've added reading and writing, and I keep adding more and more advanced lessons for the course. And so I feel like, yeah, you have to like be the change you want to see in the world. And we just keep expanding the program till now. I feel like it'll be really hard for anyone to kind of catch up with us. Almost once or twice a day, I get requests for children's programs. And that's another thing that I'm like, surely someone can come and do this. Like, does it have to be me? But then I realized like, okay, I think it has to be me. So now we are in talks of like creating this children's program. I'm trying to create a big collaborative effort there with different artists and different musicians and different people to do that. So that's kind of next on the horizon. I have a lot of ideas for, things like books, like cooking things, because we work a lot with different chefs, Iranian chefs. I'd love to do something on that front. There's a lot of ideas. It's just I do tend to work very slowly. The pace of my work I'm very comfortable with right now. We have a team of about 5 or 6 people, of all contractors, in addition to my 50-50 partner that work in different capacities for Chai Conversations. So the more team we add, the more quickly we can do work. So that's really nice. But, I like the pace. I like my lifestyle. I have a good work-life balance. I have 3 kids that I spend a lot of time with. And so I just am going to continue at this pace and not, I want to have as much impact as I can. That is important to me, but I also want to live my life the way on my terms, I guess. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm doing.
So amazing. Absolutely incredible. And it's been cool to see your journey over the last couple of years. And I'm curious, from your seat now, you mentioned you have 3 kids. What's it like for you now raising an Iranian family in the States and trying to instill the excitement and passion and vigor for the Iranian culture in a very complicated climate today? What's it like for you and raising your kids Iranian today? What's maybe key lessons you try to instill, key ideas, anything that's top of mind or bubbles to the surface for you?
Well, so I always thought the person I married had to be able to speak Persian and all this kind of stuff growing up. But, I married an American guy, and he's not like, he does pick up some Persian, but it's not like he's like listened to the podcast or anything like that. And that's become less important to me. I feel like I get my cultural needs from other, I have my podcast, I have my community. And so it's not as important to me anymore. But we do, having said that, like, we do have 3 kids, and I speak exclusively Persian to them. They don't always answer back to me in Persian, which again is fine too. I've become a lot more flexible actually in how I feel about it. And I do think that kids learn by example. So we do celebrate the holidays, and we do, you know, uh, I talk about things that I love about Iran. Unfortunately, we can't go to Iran anymore. I used to be able to go, and that's just not possible anymore. So I can't take them there. But I'm not as strict about it, but I do love for them to experience the culture. So we watch cartoons that are Iranian. My mom lives in Austin half of the time, so they have that relationship with her that I had with my grandparents. It's really nice. And when they go to her house, I'm like, listen, this is Iran. Like, you only can speak Farsi, and they do. They're really good about it. And then they love Persian food. Like my 7-year-old, you ask him his favorite food, and he's like, "Or Miss Habsi." So that's his, like, he loves to eat it. So we like to go eat, kebab, and so I like to show them the joy of the culture. I don't want it to be a difficult thing. And for me, it's such a joyful, fun culture. So I want to show them that side of it. But in terms of like my relationship with my husband, like, I'm not as strict about like, oh, he has to do this, he has to do, he has his own thing going on, and it's okay.
Do you think in our lifetime we'll be able to go to Iran ever? I've never been myself. Do you think that the climate in which, I know it's a crystal ball question, but do you think we'll ever see a situation in which we'll be able to go over there and visit safely?
I mean, a lot of smart people that I talk to say yes. So I don't know. But it seems like the half-life of these protests is getting like smaller and smaller. And it seems like every time they come up way more ferociously. And it really has woken up, the diaspora. Like, do you feel a change since like the past couple years yourself?
It seems like, and maybe honestly, I think it could be because of the UAE and Saudi culture opening up to the US and that relationship getting tighter. I mean, this is all speculative, whatever, but maybe because that's become more normalized. I feel like I see more people going to the Middle East on social, and maybe
Hmm.
social media has normalized that a little bit more too. But I feel like I see it, and I see people in the streets of Iran doing things you would never expect. And like, because you're able to your point, there's the stereotypes that we all have in our heads about whether it's Texas or Iran. You're seeing it on social media every day, whether it's Twitter or X or Instagram or whatnot. So I have no clue, but it's exciting and a motivator for me to continue to learn more about the Persian culture and enhance my Farsi to be able to be more confident when I go over there one day, and hopefully just be able to blend right in.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I
Now,
think there's hope.
I do too. I really do too. Now, I guess as we round out here, I'm curious. You've been doing this for 15 years. For someone that might be just starting out, I think what's so exciting and beautiful about what you're doing is, to your point, there's uh, so many strings you could pull on, so many different avenues you could go from to more interviews to children's content. There's a lot of different ways you can go, which is so exciting and probably so motivating for you to wake up every day and do what you absolutely love. And you being the creator of your own universe, some days you can go 150% on the throttle, and some days you can just go down to 50 and be a mother, a wife, whatever you need to do in your day to day that's outside of CEO and founder. But from your seat, someone say you were able to go talk to Leyla in 2010. What would you tell her? What would you tell her to focus on? What would you tell her to maybe shy away from? If you knew what you know now back then, how would you approach this amazing universe you've created?
Well, so, I've always been into finances, and there's this idea of compounding. And I think compounding is so important. Like, financially, the advice that I would give is the same as I would give to business advice. It's just that you need to automate your investments, automate your money into savings, investments every month, and over time, and, invest in good things. And over time, compounding will really help. So, when I started working that first job that I said, I was making $17 an hour in architecture. And still with that, every month I was just investing a little bit, putting my money on investments. And now I've seen, I will say I invested all of it back then in Apple. So I lucked out too. But I see the fruits of that now where, it just compounded. And it's that same thing that I was saying, is that chart of like slow investments. And then now you can see really the fruits of that investment. And it's the same with business. It's like, find something and just, invest in it, invest your time a little bit each week. And that's what I was doing with the podcast. I wasn't killing myself really. And at any time, there's never been a time where I've like just been working crazy, but I was just investing a little bit, just like automatic investing in index funds or something.
Right.
And then over time, there's been inflection points, but overall, like I said, like the business has been like this, and then now we're seeing the fruits of that. It compounds over time. And I really like, that's been so exciting to see. A lot of people like quit because they're like, my money's not growing like 7% a year. Like what is that? But that 7% every year just compounds. And it's that tail end of it that it just starts compounding. So that's exactly what I would say. Like, find something you're interested in, just consistently put time in it. And then eventually it will become something. And, it'll lead in a lot of different directions, but don't expect everything at once. Like, in 2010, if I saw what I have now, I would probably quit. I'd be like, I'm not going to do all that work. That's a lot of work, but then spread out over time, it's been totally manageable and totally fun and awesome.
What's been the best part of the journey for you so far?
The best part of the journey, I mean, I I don't know if I could have imagined what it would become, honestly. Like, I've tried reading my journals back then. Like, I was like, did I imagine that it would be on this scale? I'm not sure. And I asked my business partner too. I'm like, did you know that it was going to be like this? Like, is this why we've like been together for so long and been working at this so long? Because it hasn't all, when he was a tech guy and, in the beginning, he definitely wasn't getting paid what he was worth. But he stuck with it also and just like slowly kept working on it. And now, we're like, both of us are very happy with the results. So I think that, again, imagining back then that I'd be able to like live this lifestyle, I'd have access to these people, I'd be able to work the way I do, I could spend a summer in New York, and it would be like a productive summer for my business, but I'd also get to just like go to museums with my kids all summer and that kind of thing. I don't think I could have imagined that. So it's been super fun. It's just very fun.
I think that's the best part about the content that you create, is like I can see the fun and joy that you're having, whether it's explaining what a pomegranate is and writing it out and drawing the picture, or if it's an intricate, description of a very old tale poem from Iran way back when. Because I can feel the fun and excitement that you have, and I know it's just gonna continue to pay you back dividends, both in happiness and monetarily as well. And I'm excited to see where it takes you. And I think that
and also
the coolest.
sorry. I will
Please.
say also, I don't have like a person like I don't have a person policing me, because a lot of the time, like the content that I produce, I feel like if I had a job or something, I wouldn't be able to do that. Like, it's too political, or it's too like harsh, or it's too, whatever it is. I just feel like I can be myself completely in my work. So that's really cool too.
It's so beautiful, and it's exactly how I was going to round that out, which is I feel like you are the epitome of what the creator economy is meant to be, where you found a niche that you care about, you share that with an audience that cares about it, and for those that love it and resonate with it, great, and for those that don't, no worries, you'll keep doing your thing regardless. And so I'm so appreciative of the education and the culture that you're sharing with the world, and I'm just excited to see what's to come. Now, with that, I'd love to give you a chance to plug anything for my audience, whether it's the boot camps. This will probably air in a few months, so maybe not the current boot camp, but any of the lessons, the website, the Instagram handle, whatever's best for you. I'd love to give you a chance to round us out here.
Sure. You can follow me at Chai and Conversation on any platform, whether it's on Instagram or TikTok. On Twitter, I am just Leyla, and that I would not recommend anyone follow me there, because it's just basically me yelling at Greg Abbott, and I feel like I am my most authentic self on Twitter, which no one wants to see. No, but what else? I have a newsletter and all that kind of stuff as well. So I do all that. And then, yeah, we do these free boot camps. That's my onboarding is I provide these free boot camps, and people get to experience the full, full work of the platform. And a lot of people choose to continue with us. And that's been a really nice way for us to introduce our program to people. So it's been fun.
So amazing. Leyla, thank you so much for the time. Ruza Khubi Dashti,
Yeah.
and I'll talk to you soon.
خیلی ممنون. Thank you so much.